Madam Chair. I think that it's important to bring this conversation into the context that needs to be said, which is that we are $36 trillion in debt. As a nation, we're spending 20% of every dollar that comes in from taxpayers just to cover the interest. And guess what? American people, bad news, interest rates are going up. So that 20% is going to get worse and worse. We had Ray Dalio come in and tell Congress that we are entering potentially dark territory. There's a number of red flags. We're at the worst level of debt. We're at a worse level of debt than we were after we left the World War II. Okay, we're at that level of debt, and we didn't just fight a war. We're facing potential wars and conflicts. We're at that level of debt, and we didn't just emerge from a recession or a depression. If that happens today, you'll see the dollar no longer be the world reserve currency, and we will be in serious trouble. And so that is the context that we're in. Look, if there was all the money in the world, it's fine to throw money around, but we don't have all the money in the world. And the question that we have at hand today is it appropriate to spend taxpayer dollars on things that may not be necessary anymore? And so my question, Mr. Gonzalez, at one point in time, there was state-sponsored speech directly. It was the form of town criers, correct? So government used to fund people to go out in the street and deliver the news of the day vocally at street corners, correct? Okay, why don't we do that today?
Well, I think it's because we have better ways of delivering the news.
I think you get my point. Like today, at one point in time, there was very limited access to news, and there was an appropriate time where potentially we needed to have state-sponsored news. But is that the way? Do we need that today?
No, we do not. And may I quote Thomas Jefferson on this very point, since you bring this up? He said, "To compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical." This is what I base my opposition to public funding for media.
Yeah, and that's why I think that given this context, like, let's be real. It was said that we're attacking free speech. This is state-sponsored speech, and the very reason why we have these witnesses before us today isn't because they're totally being funded or completely being funded. We're not bringing in Disney Channel in here, right? We're not bringing in the National Geographic, right, for their content. The reason why we're having this conversation is because we are funding you, and because we're funding you, the taxpayers get to have an opportunity to ask, why are we funding some of this content that they might disagree with? Right?
Yeah, no, that's completely right. In fact, I think that PBS and NPR, but especially PBS, will thrive on the membership model. They keep saying it's such a small percentage. Well, if it's the public funding, if it's such a small percentage, then no problem.
Yeah. So, Ms. Maurer, I'm going to ask a very difficult question, but if you're in my shoes and you have to face the fact, can we fund Social Security or do we spend money on NPR? Which would you choose?
Congressman, I would argue that
if you had to pick, if you were forced to make a decision, there wasn't enough money to go around, Social Security or NPR?
We know how important public media is to our nation's seniors, sir.
More important than Social Security. I think the American people disagree.
I think that
Ms. Kerger, let me ask this. Would it be more appropriate to fund PBS or to fund veterans' health care? If given limited resources, which is where we're at.
I recognize the limited resources, and I feel that both are important for this country.
And I think what the American people want to know is when they're sending money, their taxpayer dollars, and they're funding things like Independent Lens. And look, I like some of the content on your stations. I love Nova. But you know what? Nova competes with National Geographic and Nature. Why are we funding something that competes with these private sector industries? I like Sesame Street, but I also know that it's competing directly with Handy Manny, Doc McStuffins, and Little Einsteins, right? Those exist, and we're not funding them. They're not here having to defend their content. But because we are funding it, I'm going to ask you, why are we funding an episodes of Real Lens, Independent Lens, about an episode called Real Boy, a trans teen navigates adolescent sobriety and physical emotional ramifications. That's what the American people want to know. Social Security.
Our witness, we're out
Or
of
this
time, but our
program.
witnesses can answer the questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was a documentary that was produced for adults as part of our primetime audience, and it was part of a point of view that we share to try to help people understand the wide breadth of experiences of people across the country.
Thank you, Madam Chair.